in the vast, sun-drenched fields of Andalusia, where the earth was baked golden by the unrelenting Spanish sun and the scent of rosemary and dust clung to the breeze, there lived a bull unlike any other. His name was Torbellino, which meant whirlwind, and it was a name he had earned from his very first steps. Born on a moonless night, during a raging thunderstorm, Torbellino had emerged into the world not with a whimper, but with a snarl and a kick. He was a calf of powerful lineage, his father a famed champion of the ring, his mother known for her fierce temper. Ranch hands at Rancho del Sol, one of the most prestigious breeding grounds for fighting bulls in all of Spain, knew from the moment they laid eyes on him that Torbellino would not be easy. His coat was black as midnight, his eyes a smoldering red-brown, and a bold white streak slashed down the middle of his face like lightning carved into flesh. As he grew, so too did the stories. At just 1 year old, he had broken through a steel gate, sending an old rancher flying. By the age of 2, he'd maimed a handler and gored another bull in what was supposed to be a controlled sparring session. He became infamous not just for his strength, but for his fury. There was no calm in him, no pause before he charged. The mere sound of boots on gravel would send him into a frenzy, hooves pounding the dirt, horns slashing at the air. The ranchers feared him. No one dared enter his paddock. They reinforced his enclosure with concrete posts and electrified fencing. Still, he tested it daily, slamming his weight against the barriers, eyes full of rage. Don Mauricio, the owner of the ranch, was at a loss. "He's untouchable," he'd mutter over his wine, shaking his head. A beast born of storm and fire. Yet Don Mauricio couldn't bring himself to send Torbellino to the ring. Not yet. Something held him back. A curiosity, a superstition, perhaps a fear. So Torbellino remained isolated, his days spent pacing like a prisoner, muscles tense and restless. He attacked birds that dared to land nearby. He bellowed at the sky, a sound that echoed for miles. Locals whispered that he was cursed, born under bad stars. No one knew what to do with him. He had become a problem too dangerous to ignore, but too powerful to destroy. Far away, in a quiet, rain-kissed village in northern England, a little girl named Clara lived with her parents. Clara was 5, small for her age, with wide eyes and curly brown hair that bounced when she laughed. Her world was one of soft blankets, bedtime stories, and muddy boots. She had an insatiable curiosity, always asking why, always reaching out to touch the unknown. Clara's father, Dr. James Worthing, was a large animal veterinarian with a reputation for his calm hands and quick mind. When he received an offer from Rancho del Sol to become their head veterinarian, it felt like a dream. With her mother's blessing, the family packed their lives into suitcases and boarded a plane, trading the drizzle of England for the sun of Spain. Clara was enchanted from the moment they arrived. The ranch was a tapestry of movement and color. Olive trees stretching toward the sky, horses galloping across fields, and bulls snorting in distant pens. She ran barefoot across the grass, chased lizards, and talked to the chickens in her sing-song voice. One evening, as the sun spilled gold over the hills and the cicadas began their song, Clara heard a sound that stopped her in her tracks. A deep, guttural roar that seemed to rise from the belly of the earth itself. It was wild and wounded, angry and afraid. She turned to her father. "What was that?" she asked, eyes wide. James exchanged a glance with one of the ranchers and said, "That's Torbellino. Stay far away from him, Clara. He's not like the other bulls." But Clara, as children often do, did not feel fear. She felt wonder. And so the story began, not with a hero or a villain, but with a question in the heart of a child and a beast who had forgotten what it meant to be seen. Torbellino continued to rage, as was his nature. Every morning began with snorts and stumps, a declaration of war against the world. He would tear at the earth with his hooves, throw himself against the reinforced walls of his paddock, and bellow until the hills echoed with his fury. His eyes were ever watchful, waiting for a challenge or a mistake, anything that gave him an excuse to charge. The workers at Rancho del Sol had grown used to his routine, though it never made them any less cautious. They avoided his paddock as if it were cursed ground, approaching only when absolutely necessary. Feed was slid into his enclosure quickly, water refilled with trembling hands. He was the devil in bull's hide, and no one wanted to be the next tale whispered by firelight. But Clara was not like the others. She began her mornings asking questions about Torbellino. She sat at the kitchen table, swinging her feet as she peppered her father with curiosity. Why is he angry? Do bulls get lonely? Do they remember people who are kind to them? James would answer what he could, always ending with the same caution. He's too dangerous, Clara. Don't go near his paddock. Ever. Clara would nod, but her eyes always wandered toward the fields where she had first heard the roar. It was on a bright afternoon, the sky clear and blue, that she wandered a little too far. Her mother was painting wildflowers by the old barn, and James was treating a lame horse near the stables. Clara walked quietly, her small feet silent in the grass. She followed a butterfly past the olive grove, through the whispering grass, and came to the heavy gate. And there he was. Torbellino stood at the far end of his paddock, his back to the world, muscles rippling with each breath. He turned when he sensed her, his gaze sharp, nostrils flaring. For a moment, the air itself seemed to freeze. Clara didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply stood, looking up at him through the wooden slats. "Hello," she said. The bull snorted, pawed the earth once. But something in her tone, gentle, steady, seemed to confuse him. He lowered his head slightly, watching her with curiosity. She smiled and sat cross-legged in the grass, no more than a few feet from the gate. And Torbellino, the untouchable, stood still and watched her. For several long minutes, the world held its breath. Clara, no more than a speck before the massive bull, simply sat, humming to herself and picking at the grass with her tiny fingers. She didn't flinch when Torbellino took a slow step forward. Nor did she react when he snorted again, louder this time, sending dust into the air. Her quiet presence, so small and unthreatening, did something to him that no whip, wall, or handler ever had. He stopped. His ears flicked toward her, his powerful chest rising and falling with the weight of every breath. He was still watching, still uncertain, but there was no anger in his stance now. Only a heavy, puzzled tension, like a drawn bow not yet loosed. Clara giggled. "You look grumpy," she said matter-of-factly, as if scolding a sleepy dog. "My daddy says that's because you don't trust anyone. But I'm not anyone. I'm Clara." He blinked. A blink. To those hiding behind distant windows, or watching from the barn roof with binoculars, it might have seemed like nothing. But to anyone who knew Torbellino, who knew how he never blinked first, who faced all things with unflinching rage, it was seismic. Day after day, Clara returned. Her parents didn't know at first. She was clever careful. She never opened the gate. She never touched the fence. But every day, while the ranch stirred with chores and shouts and boots stomping through mud, Clara found her way back to Torbellino. Sometimes she brought a piece of fruit. Other times, she simply talked. She told him stories about England, about her toy rabbit named Pudding, about how the rain always sounded like drumming fingers on her windowsill. Torbellino began to wait for her. He no longer raged in the mornings. Instead, he stood near the far post, watching the path that led from the olive grove. When he saw the little shape bounding through the grass, he would snort, softly, and shuffle forward. Sometimes he would nudge the earth gently with his horn, like he was clearing a space for her. Word spread among the workers. The little girl and the beast, they said in hushed tones. A few tried to witness it for themselves, but whenever adults were near, Torbellino's eyes would flash with old fury, and he would retreat to his savage habits. Only Clara, it seemed, could peel back the storm. Don Mauricio himself came to see one morning, standing at a distance with a glass of sherry in hand. He watched through field glasses as the monstrous bull lowered his head, not in threat, but as if in greeting. The old rancher turned to James Worthing and muttered, "That girl, she's not just brave. She's magic." James was less romantic about it. He was angry, furious, even when he learned where Clara had been sneaking off to. "You could have been killed," he shouted that night. "Do you understand what that bull is capable of?" Clara stood by the door, small hands clenched at her sides. But he didn't. He wouldn't. "He's not mean, Daddy. He's just scared." And for the first time, James was silent. Not because she was right. He wasn't ready to admit that yet, but because something in her voice had shaken him. Something deeper than innocence. A week later, he went with her. He kept his distance, of course, but he watched as she sat beside the gate and began to hum a lullaby. Torbellino approached, slowly, cautiously. When Clara held up a slice of apple, he sniffed it, then gently took it from her hand. No snapping jaws, no charging hooves. James felt something hard in his chest shift. He realized that his daughter wasn't just calming the bull. She was transforming him. That night, he and Don Mauricio talked long into the evening. There was a suggestion, one that made both men uncomfortable, but intrigued. Perhaps, instead of the ring, Torbellino's story could take a different path. But for now, it was enough to watch the storm begin to calm. The sun rose differently after that day. Not because it shone brighter or warmer, but because everything at Rancho del Sol had shifted. The workers still whispered and watched, but now they did so with hope flickering behind their eyes. What once had been a place of anxiety, Torbellino's paddock, had become a point of wonder. Clara continued her visits, now with her father's permission, but still under a watchful eye. Torbellino no longer stormed the walls or bellowed at passing birds. He stood quietly when she came, always by the gate, as if he'd counted the hours until her return. He let her sing, read picture books aloud, and feed him apple slices, melon cubes, or even the crust of her sandwich. He was still massive, still dangerous to anyone but her. Yet the fierceness had dulled, like a sword that no longer needed to be drawn. His eyes, once glowing embers, now held the color of earth after rain. One morning, Clara brought something new, a red scarf. "It's for you," she said, holding it up. Torbellino regarded the fluttering cloth with interest, not agitation. Any other bull, any other day, would have charged it instinctively. But not Torbellino, not now. He tilted his head and took a gentle step forward. Clara tied the scarf to the lowest beam of the gate, letting it flutter in the breeze like a flag of peace. Don Mauricio saw it later that day. He smiled in a way that made his weathered face look years younger. "Perhaps it is not the color, but the hands that hold it," he mused. And then came the reporters. Word had spread, as it always does. First to the neighboring ranches, then to the cities, then to journalists who smelled a story of legend. A killer bull calmed by a child? Impossible. But photos didn't lie. Clara's mother, once reluctant, now captured her daughter's encounters with a camera, sending images back to family in England. Eventually, they landed in inboxes of journalists in Madrid, then Barcelona, then the world. They came with notebooks, cameras, and skepticism, and they left with silence. None dared go near the fence themselves, but through zoom lenses and binoculars, they witnessed the truth. Torbellino bowing his head so Clara could stroke his brow, gently nudging her with the side of his horn, like a dog might a friend. She laughed without fear. The beast known across Spain for his bloodthirsty rages stood calm and still, as if in prayer. Headlines followed. The Girl Who Tamed the Storm. Torbellino's Angel. When a Whisper Beat a Roar. Sponsors reached out. A documentary team proposed a film. Matadors offered to fly in just to study him. But Don Mauricio turned them all away for now. He wouldn't turn this miracle into a circus. Not yet. Not while it was still fragile. Meanwhile, James Worthing, who had come to Spain as a vet and father, now found himself at the heart of something mythic. He took notes, observed behavior, and began writing a paper, not just for scientific journals, but for himself. The transformation he saw wasn't just in Torbellino. It was in Clara and himself, in all who bore witness to the bond between child and bull. But not everyone believed. At the edge of the bullfighting world stood those who saw this story as an insult. The proud tradition of bullfighting was not one of mercy. Bulls were bred to fight, to fall, to be glorified through resistance, not gentleness. Whispers turned into grumbles. Was this softness going to make bulls weaker? Was the girl a distraction? Could a bull that refused to charge still be a bull at all? One particularly influential matador, El Diente, mocked the story on national television. Perhaps he is not a bull at all, he sneered. Perhaps he is a cow in disguise. Don Mauricio heard the insult and felt fire rise in his chest. But Clara, when she heard it, simply looked confused. He's still strong, she said to her father that evening. He just doesn't need to fight anymore. And there it was. Truth, simple and bright. That night, while the stars dusted the sky and cicadas sang their shrill lullaby, Don Mauricio and James sat beside the paddock fence. Torbellino slept near the gate, his enormous body rising and falling in the dark. "We can't keep this hidden forever," Mauricio said. James nodded. "I know. But we can choose what to do next." James turned to him. "What are you thinking?" "A show. Not a fight. A demonstration. Let the world see what strength really looks like." They said no more, but the idea had been spoken, and in the hush of the Andalusian night, a new future began to take shape, one not written in blood, but in awe. Preparations began in secret. Don Mauricio didn't want to announce anything until every detail was in place. What they were planning was unprecedented, not a bullfight, not a spectacle, but something far more delicate, a presentation of peace, a declaration that strength could wear gentleness like armor. And at the heart of it all, a little girl with wide eyes and untamed curls, and the great beast who once struck fear into hardened men. The first to be invited were other ranch owners, those who had whispered and wagered on Torbellino's temper. Then came the journalists who had treated Clara's visits like fables, the skeptics, the traditionalists. Invitations were handwritten and delivered by trusted hands. There were no posters, no fanfare, just a quiet promise that something worth seeing was about to unfold. The event was scheduled for a crisp spring morning. The arena, long and used, was swept and prepared not for a fight, but for something gentler. No red capes, no spears, no cries of ole, just a ring of silence and anticipation. Clara was dressed simply, in white linen, barefoot, with a crown of wildflowers picked from the hills. She carried no tools, no treats, just herself, just trust. Torbellino entered first. He was led not by rope, but by his own will. The gates opened wide and unforced. The crowd held its breath as the black titan stepped into the light. Even in his stillness, he commanded the air like a thundercloud. His shoulders were mountains, his horns arcs of bone and shadow. But his eyes sought something soft. Then Clara stepped through the opposite gate. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. The contrast between them, man-made beast and barefoot child, was almost too much to bear. She walked slowly, calmly, her tiny hand swinging at her sides. When Torbellino saw her, his great head dipped. She walked to the center of the ring and sat. Torbellino followed. He lowered himself to the dust with a grunt that stirred the silence like thunder beneath velvet. The crowd leaned forward. Every camera clicked, but Clara only smiled. She told him a story. There were no microphones, no translations, just the soft murmur of a 5-year-old talking about her toy rabbit, about a dream she'd had, about clouds that looked like ships. And Torbellino listened. He listened. The spell held for almost half an hour. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. And when Clara stood and walked to him, pressing her tiny face against his massive forehead, some in the crowd wept. It was not a show. It was revelation. When the event ended, no one clapped. Not out of disrespect, but because applause would have shattered the fragile miracle they had just witnessed. That night, every major network in Spain ran the footage. Overnight, Clara and Torbellino became symbols, not of defiance or novelty, but of a reimagined future. A future where even the most feared creatures could choose peace over fury. But with fame came pressure. Matadors protested. "This is not our tradition," they shouted. "This insults centuries of culture." Some threatened legal action. Others accused Don Mauricio of exploiting a child. There were interviews, arguments, heated debates on talk shows. Through it all, Clara was kept away, protected, unbothered. She still visited Torbellino every morning, still sang to him, still brought stories of dragons and pancakes. To her, nothing had changed. But for Don Mauricio and James, the world was shifting. Offers flooded in. American zoos, French circuses, even an Italian opera company wanted Torbellino and Clara to tour. Books, documentaries, museum exhibits. And the money. More than enough to save the ranch for generations. And yet, Mauricio and James sat once more under the Andalusian stars, a bottle of wine between them. Torbellino sleeping close to the fence. "If we accept," James said, "we risk turning them into entertainment." Mauricio nodded. "But if we refuse, the story might fade. And what a story it is." James leaned back. "We tell it, but our way, on our terms. No tricks, no shows, just truth." Mauricio smiled. "Let the world come to them, not the other way around." And so the decision was made. Rancho del Sol would become a sanctuary, a place where people could come to see not the rage of bulls, but the peace within them. And at the center of it all, the girl and the giant, teaching the world that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is be still. Rancho del Sol was no longer just a ranch. It was becoming something bigger, part myth, part movement. And though Don Mauricio insisted on keeping the place grounded, there was no denying the shift in energy. By the end of the month, people came. Not crowds, not yet, but pilgrims. They traveled from cities and villages, from France, Portugal, and Morocco. Artists, scholars, monks, teachers. Some came to write, some to observe, and some, without knowing why, simply to feel. The sanctuary was not open in the traditional sense. There were no guided tours, no tickets. Visitors could sit beneath the olive trees or beside the outer paddocks. They could watch in silence as Clara and Torbellino moved together with the ease of ancient friends. There were no demonstrations scheduled, no speeches given. And somehow, this made every encounter more sacred. Clara remained unchanged. She still skipped in the dust barefoot, still offered flowers to birds and poems to the wind. But even she began to understand, in her own childlike way, that something larger was growing around her. "They come to see him," she told her father one morning, "but they end up listening." James nodded. "To what?" She tapped her chest. "To this. Each morning began the same. Clara at the gate, Torbellino waiting. They would walk side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes with laughter. He followed her without rope, without command. Once, she brought him a small tambourine, and he paused, tilting his head as she played. When she stopped, he gently nudged the instrument, as if asking for more. The watchers learned to be still. They learned that patience bore gifts. One elderly man wept openly after seeing the two lie side by side in the sand, Clara's tiny hand on Torbellino's chest. A young woman from Barcelona later wrote, "I came seeking a miracle, and found a mirror instead." But not everyone understood. A group of traditionalists, staunch defenders of the bullfighting legacy, appeared one morning uninvited. They stood at the fence, arms crossed, watching with stern faces. One of them, a retired matador named Solares, spoke loudly to a nearby journalist. "What this girl does it is cute, but it changes nothing. Bulls are beasts. They must be reminded of their place." Don Mauricio stood nearby, silent. Clara heard the words. She said nothing, but when she walked to Torbellino that morning, she did something different. She placed her hands on his horns, not in defiance, but in offering. The great bull bowed his head low. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lay at her feet. It was not submission. It was trust. Solares said nothing after that. That evening, James wrote in his journal, "What she teaches him, he returns tenfold." In that exchange, there is something holy. Meanwhile, Don Mauricio began making quiet changes to the ranch. A new structure was built, a circular, open-roofed arena not for combat, but communion. Designed with smooth sandstone and wood, it resembled ancient amphitheaters, yet was intimate, holding only 50 seats. He called it El Anillo del Silencio, the Ring of Silence. Here, invited guests would sit once a week to observe. No cameras, no phones, just presence. Sometimes Clara read poems. Sometimes she danced. Sometimes she said nothing at all. Whatever she did, Torbellino was always with her, a dark sentinel at her side. And the world kept listening. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from an old ranch in Argentina. They had a bull, wild, uncontrollable, dangerous. But they had seen what Clara had done. Could she come? Mauricio read it aloud to James. "What do we do with this?" James rubbed his chin. "We can't send her to every ranch with a troubled bull." "No," Mauricio said, "but maybe we can teach others to listen." And so another idea began to form. A program. A school, perhaps, not for taming bulls, but for teaching presence, patience, peace. Clara wouldn't be its teacher. She would be its muse, its symbol. James began to draft outlines. Experts were contacted. Ethologists, child psychologists, animal behaviorists. The goal wasn't to create bull whisperers, but to cultivate awareness. How to approach life, not just animals, with calm, with courage, with care. And always, Clara remained at the center, unaware of her growing legend. To her, it was all still very simple. She had a friend. A big, black friend who had once been angry, but now just liked stories and sunshine. And so the hills of Andalusia echoed, not with the cries of matadors or the drums of spectacle, but with something quieter, more lasting. A girl and her bull, teaching the world to be still. Spring gave way to summer, and the air in Andalusia turned warm and fragrant, thick with jasmine and promise. Rancho del Sol had never known such attention. It hummed with gentle activity, letters arriving in bundles, volunteers helping tend to the land, and visitors sitting cross-legged near the fences, notebooks open, hearts ajar. But something deeper stirred now, an invitation not just to witness, but to participate. Clara remained the same. She still rose early, running barefoot across the dew-drenched field to where Torbellino, weighted like a mountain with the heartbeat. He would lower his head and snort softly, brushing her arm with his velvet muzzle. She would laugh, whisper something into his ear, and the day would begin. But James had noticed changes, subtle but present. "She's growing," he told Mauricio one afternoon as they leaned on the corral fence. "Not just taller, different, quieter, wiser." Mauricio didn't answer immediately. His eyes were on the girl and the bull, who were moving slowly through the arena in perfect unison. "Maybe," he said finally, "the bull is growing too." By midsummer, El Anillo del Silencio was full every week. More than spectators, the guests were seekers. There were quiet meditation teachers from Kyoto, a falconer from Mongolia, even a retired general from Colombia who admitted, in broken Spanish, that he hadn't wept in 20 years until seeing Clara touch Torbellino's chest with her palm. One afternoon, a new kind of visitor arrived. Her name was Dr. Lena Volkov, a renowned ethologist from Zurich, with credentials that could fill volumes and a demeanor as crisp as her tailored suits. She came not to marvel, but to measure. With devices and notebooks, she recorded Clara's movements, tracked Torbellino's heart rate, even analyzed patterns in their breathing. "This is not magic," she said one evening by the fire, eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. "This is resonance, empathy as alignment. Their bond is measurable." James asked gently, "And what does that mean for the rest of us?" Dr. Volkov smiled. "It means we can learn." Inspired by her findings, the school project evolved. What began as a dream took form: the Clara Institute for Gentle Presence, a center where teachers and students could learn the language of listening. Construction began on a small scale: classrooms, gardens, and a circular hall open to the elements, mirroring the rhythm of the Ring of Silence. And Clara? She watched the new buildings rise like hills of hope, but her world remained simple. In the mornings, she visited Torbellino. In the evenings, she wrote poems in her notebook or sang lullabies to the stars. One night, during a summer storm, she sat beside Torbellino in his shelter. Lightning split the sky, and the thunder rolled like ancient drums. He flinched once, muscles rippling with old instincts, but she placed her hand on his side. "It's just the sky," she whispered. "It's loud, but it can't touch us." And he believed her. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. A young boy named Mateo, no older than 8, who had been watching for days but too frightened to approach, stepped into the outer ring. His parents gasped, but he walked steadily toward Clara. "I want to sit with him too," he said. Clara nodded. "You can. But first, you have to be still in here." She pointed to his chest. "Not just out there." Mateo closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then walked forward. Torbellino didn't move. He watched, waited, and then he bowed his head, just slightly, the way he did for Clara. A new chapter had opened. Later that week, a child from northern Africa joined them, then one from Norway, a blind girl from Lisbon, all drawn by something they couldn't name, learning not to tame animals, but to calm themselves. The legend of Clara and the bull was no longer a tale of one child. It was becoming a language of its own. And so, the winds of change swept across Andalusia, not as storms, but as whispers, through olive groves and quiet paddocks, through villages and cities. People spoke of a little girl and a wild bull who had taught each other stillness, and taught the world to listen. By the end of autumn, the leaves in Andalusia turned bronze and gold, and the hills shimmered with a quiet kind of magic. Rancho del Sol had become a beacon, not through promotion or spectacle, but through the undeniable pull of something deeply human. Or perhaps, something more than human. In the months following Mateo's first steps into the ring, more children arrived. Word spread in the way sacred things do, softly, but surely. A boy with a stutter found his voice after weeks of sitting in the outer ring, whispering secrets to the breeze. A girl who had once been afraid of animals now painted every day, always including a black bull with kind eyes in the center of her canvases. The Clara Institute, for gentle presence, was nearly complete. It wasn't large, 3 simple buildings nestled beside a grove of ancient olive trees. There was a teaching circle, open to the sky, a library filled with books about empathy, connection, silence, and a garden where children grew herbs with their own hands. Dr. Volkov returned, this time with 2 colleagues. Together, they began writing what they called the Stillness Protocol, a framework that might be taught in schools, homes, shelters. Not instructions for calming bulls, but for calming ourselves, for being with another without demand or fear. Every day at noon, Clara still walked into the ring. It was never required. No one asked it of her. She simply did it. And every day, Torbellino waited. But something new had begun to stir in the great bull. A kind of restlessness. Not of rage, never again rage, but of readiness. He had grown older, wiser. But now he watched the children as they entered the ring, not only with curiosity, but with caution, as though taking responsibility for their safety. Don Mauricio noticed it first. He's becoming something else, he said one evening. What do you mean? Asked James. He's no longer just a symbol. He's becoming a guardian. It was true. One afternoon, a visitor brought a dog, against the rules. The dog, frightened by the stillness of a ring, barked and darted forward. Before anyone could react, Torbellino moved, fast as thunder. He stepped in front of Clara and let out a low, deep sound that shook the ground. The dog stopped in its tracks, then turned and fled. Clara had not flinched. She simply reached up and touched his leg. "Thank you," she whispered. The incident was small, but it changed things. People began to see Torbellino not just as tamed, but transformed. The media latched onto the phrase, the guardian bull. Still, the ranch remained private. Visitors had to write letters first. James and Mauricio read every one, choosing only those who came not out of curiosity, but sincerity. They had turned down celebrities, influencers, producers. One offered a 7-figure deal to make a feature film. They declined. "This isn't a story to be sold," James said. "It's one to be shared." And shared they did. Slowly, carefully. One foggy morning, a new letter arrived. It was from a teacher in a village outside Seville. Her students had seen Clara on television and wanted to send something in return. Enclosed were dozens of crayon drawings, each one depicting a little girl and a bull. In every picture, the bull was smiling. Clara laid them out on the floor of the library and examined each one. "This one," she said, holding up a bright green drawing, "feels like a hug." That evening, they decided to begin sending stories outward, not just welcoming people in. Clara dictated her thoughts to James, who wrote them down carefully, word for word. Her stories weren't formal lessons. They were dreams, feelings, fragments of insight in a 5-year-old's voice. Sometimes Torbellino breathes like the sea. That means he's happy. If you close your eyes and listen to birds, your heart goes quieter. If someone is angry, maybe they forgot how to listen. These were printed and mailed to children's hospitals, community centers, even a few prisons. Everywhere, they were received with quiet wonder. And so the circle widened, not by force, but by invitation. One night, Clara stood at the fence looking at the stars. Torbellino stood behind her, silent as ever. "Do you think the stars talk?" she asked. James, who had joined her with a blanket, smiled. "What do they say?" "They say, don't rush. We waited a long time for you to look up." Rancho del Sol had become more than a sanctuary. It was becoming a voice. Winter came quietly to Andalusia, painting the hills in soft shades of gray. The mornings grew colder, and the evenings stretched long and deep, filled with the smell of burning wood and the quiet murmur of the world preparing for sleep. Rancho del Sol, however, had never been more alive. The Clara Institute for Gentle Presence had opened its doors officially. The first group of students arrived, a mixture of teachers, parents, and children from various corners of the globe. The classrooms were simple, filled with sunlight and the scent of herbs. In the garden, the students learned to grow not just plants, but patience. The circle in the center of the ranch became a place of deep listening, where everyone, no matter their background or story, came to understand the art of stillness. Clara's role remained unchanged. She continued to be the heart of it all, but she was not the teacher. She was the muse, the symbol of possibility. Her words, written and spoken, guided the students, but they were not lessons in the traditional sense. They were invitations to discover, to sit with the quiet, to understand the language of presence. One afternoon, Dr. Volkov returned, bringing with her a team of researchers from around the world. They had been studying the phenomenon of Clara and Torbellino for months, conducting experiments and observations. Their conclusion was simple, yet profound. The bond between Clara and the bull was not only emotional, it was biological. The rhythms of their hearts and breaths were in sync. Their nervous systems operated in harmony. They are, in a sense, one organism, Dr. Volkov explained, her voice soft with awe. What you are witnessing here is an extraordinary example of interspecies empathy. Don Mauricio, who had been listening quietly, asked, "But what does that mean for us?" "It means that we can learn," she replied. "This bond, this stillness, it's not unique to Clara and Torbellino. It's a potential that exists in all of us, but we have forgotten how to listen." Her words lingered in the air like the last notes of a psalm. And indeed, the world was beginning to listen. In the months that followed, the school began to flourish. It was no longer a quiet experiment, but a living, breathing movement. More students arrived, each bringing a piece of their own story, their own struggle. The work was slow, sometimes frustrating, but always steady. And every evening, after the lessons and after the work, Clara would go to Torbellino, and the two of them would sit beneath the stars. One evening, as Clara sat on the fence beside her great friend, she asked, "Do you think we've done enough?" Torbellino did not answer, but his presence seemed to speak for him. The way his body was still and open, the way his dark eyes watched the horizon, it was a quiet affirmation. It had never been about doing enough. It had always been about being enough. And so, the world continued to listen, not to the noise of machines or the rush of ambition, but to the song of silence, the quiet hum of connection, the pulse of shared breath. The story of Clara and Torbellino had become more than a tale. It had become a movement, and like all great movements, it was rooted in stillness. And as long as the stars shone above Rancho del Sol, Clara and Torbellino would continue their quiet dance, showing the world what it meant to truly listen. The days blurred together like strokes of paint on an ever-changing canvas. Spring unfolded into summer, and Rancho del Sol became a place of pilgrimage, not only for those seeking to tame wild bulls, but for those seeking to tame the wildness within themselves. Clara's presence had changed the world in ways no one could fully grasp, and yet everyone felt it. The Clara Institute for Gentle Presence had become a beacon, a place where students from all over the world gathered, each with their own struggles, their own battles, but all seeking the same quiet truth, the power of stillness, of presence, of listening. In a way, the Institute had grown beyond what Clara had ever imagined. It was not just a school. It was a movement. It was a reminder that, in a world filled with noise, the greatest gift we could give each other, and ourselves, was the ability to be still and to listen. As the years passed, Clara continued to walk beside Torbellino, her great friend, the bull who had once been a force of rage, but had become something more, a symbol of peace, of possibility. Together, they taught the world the language of silence. One evening, as Clara sat beneath the stars, her hand resting on Torbellino's broad back, she asked him, "Do you think we've done enough?" Torbellino's deep, steady breathing was the only answer she needed. The two of them, together, had become a living testament to what it meant to be fully present in this world. And that, Clara realized, was enough. Clara's father, James, sat nearby, watching the two of them in quiet reverence. He had witnessed his daughter's journey from the beginning, the child who had tamed a wild bull with nothing but her heart and her presence. He had watched as the world had come to Rancho del Sol to learn from her, to learn from Torbellino. He had watched as the girl and the bull had changed lives, and in doing so, had changed the world. "What have we done, Clara?" James asked, his voice soft with awe. She smiled, her gaze fixed on the bull beside her. "We've listened," she said simply. And so, Clara and Torbellino continued to walk the hills of Andalusia, side by side, teaching the world the quiet power of presence. The students who came to the ranch learned not just how to calm wild bulls, but how to calm their own hearts. They learned how to listen, not just with their ears, but with their souls. In the end, Clara and Torbellino's story became a legend. Not a legend of taming and domination, but a legend of connection, trust, and understanding. It was a story that would be passed down for generations, a story that would remind people everywhere of the power of stillness and the beauty of listening. As long as the stars shone above Rancho del Sol, Clara and Torbellino's legacy would live on, and in the hearts of those who had been touched by their quiet presence, the song of silence would never fade. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.